Good morning, everyone. I am Harvey Aronson, one of the resident teachers at Dawn Mountain, and it is Sunday, August 1st, and we have our Sunday morning teaching program from 10:30 Central Time to 11 Central Time. So this morning, I thought I would talk a little bit about two important words, doing and being. When I first got interested in meditation, it was 1964, quite a while away, and I had already had a pretty good sense of my mind just chugging, just doing. And I found that kind of speedy, effortful operation of mind doing very, very distressing, actually. And I attended this talk by the then Richard Alpert, who was going to go on to become Baba Ram Das. And he talked about conditioning and freedom. And that's actually a very, very important and significant way of talking about spirituality. And that could be a whole set of conversations and talks unto itself. But in some ways, conditioning and freedom are parallel to the two phrases of doing and being. And when I was a senior in college, in a philosophy class, I got to read and write a paper on Martin Buber's I and Thou, and it had a very, very long-lasting effect on me. Buber was a Jewish theologian who was writing in the kind of the early 20th century. It was kind of the height of optimism in science and some real challenges to religious life and religious experience. And Buber distinguished between what he called I-it relationships and I-thou relationships. And I-it relationships are really any relationships that involve instrumentality. And instrumentality is sort of I acting on something else, I making stuff happen. And instrumentality could be understood as kind of the hallmark, the mark, the symbol of the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution. Making stuff happen was really the genius and the great reward of the scientific and industrial revolution. But I-thou was very, very different. It wasn't a relationship of manipulation. It's not a relationship of doing onto something. It's not impacting things. It's not making things happen. I-thou is whether it's with another individual or with the divine. It's in a way out of the reaches of time. It's out of the reaches of instrumentality. It's got a sense of meaning and richness and depth. So my own reading of Buber was kind of frustrating because I'm a bit of an instrumental person. I went to actually, it's an engineering high school in New York, Brooklyn Tech, and it's only once I moved to Houston and hung around with Gary did I start really appreciating what an engineer is supposed to be. But I mean, I spent 4 years in an engineering high school. We didn't really talk about engineering that much. It was science. It was really oriented towards science. But I'm an instrumental kind of person. I like to make things happen. And reading Buber was a bit frustrating because he kind of created this duality between the I thou, which was a bit mysterious and mystical and wonderful and poetic, and the I it, which is the ordinary kind of worldly consciousness. But I don't know if he explicitly made the relationship between two mysterious, but it wasn't as if he had a program for how you could convert from an I it consciousness to an I thou consciousness, but being a kind of toolie and, liking cooking and, putting things together, especially I was kind of oriented towards chemistry. So, you take a pinch of this and a pinch of that, you put them over a Bunsen burner and put some heat in and something happens. I like that sort of thing. And he didn't provide any of that. I mean, that's total instrumental mentality, but he didn't provide any of that. Interestingly enough, and I wasn't maybe until I started thinking about it in these terms, Buddhist practice is a kind of interesting bridge between the world of instrumentality and the I thou world. And in teaching has, on the basis of a very, very pith set of instructions from Adzon Pela Rinpoche, has developed a whole number of teaching modules under the rubric of seeing to being. It's another kind of seeming duality, but we all start with seeing. I mean, seeing is ordinary consciousness. Seeing is dualistic. When we are exposed to information about openness or timelessness or unity or non-duality or peace, I mean, almost all people hearing that sort of thing take it as a goal. We hear that goal as something kind of out there, peacefulness and non-duality, understanding or wisdom or I thou. It's always going to be kind of something we see as objectively separate, at least initially. It's like a commodity. It's inevitable. It's not bad. It's nothing we can not do. I mean, we just, a necessity, we have a kind of dualistic, commodified consciousness. That's it just is. And, we bring any kind of new wine into this old bottle, it's going to be affected by the old bottle. And so Trungpa Rinpoche, in contemplating all of this and observing it in his students, writes a book entitled Spiritual Materialism. Again, it's kind of inevitable. There are, in the practice of Tibetan Buddhism, there are initiations towards practice. And so sometimes we meet people who just like to recite the initiations they've received. It's almost like, generals and colonels wear all that stuff on their chest so that we know which battles they have survived. So people collect all these initiations, and sometimes they kind of like to trot them out and let us know how spiritually significant they are. Again, it's kind of inevitable. It's just our ordinary mind can't resist collecting M&Ms. It's a doing mind. It's a seeing mind. It's an I-it mind. some interesting information in modern neuroaffective science that kind of talks about this. We relate to the ordinary world with our ordinary consciousness. And really, all of you are bright. Some of you are still working and are professionals. Some of you were professionals. We are rewarded in our culture for cognitive efficiency. And that's the outer level of the cerebral cortex. It's very, very useful. When we go to the supermarket, we don't want to have an I-thou relationship with the loaf of bread. We want to go to the aisle where we know it's bread, and we know we like Dave's organic, low-calorie bread. We know it's on the third shelf. And we just look, we see a little piece of yellow of the label. We know it's exactly what it is. And we pick it up quickly and we put it in our basket. That's cognitive processing to the max. I mean, we just see a little yellow corner of this thing. We go, whoop, whoop, and we're done. The Industrial Revolution has conquered. And it turns out, if you were to feel into yourself as you're doing that, your body is tight, your mind is tight. You're not smelling the coffee. You're actually waiting. Your mind is already on the next shelf and the next item, and where are the baked beans? And if that's all we do, and if that's the predominant aspect of our consciousness and our experience, it's enormously pressurized. It's enormously painful. It turns out, as I say, in Buddhist practice, we have brilliant bridges between the I-it and the I-thou. And of course, in a way, we use the I-it to self-dissolve into the I-thou, which is brilliant. It's genius. I mean, Buber wrote the advertising, and the Buddhists gave us the methodology. Terrific. So what happens with the practice of mindfulness that we will do at 11 is we start moving from the generic, which are the outer layers of the cerebral cortex, to the more actually sensory level of experience. The lower, apparently 6 layers to the cerebral cortex, and the lower levels are more sensory oriented. So when we tap into our experience of breathing and are really sensing the breath, not thinking about breathing, but sensing, we're moving into that more sensory level of our experience. And that sensory level has some characteristics, both implicit and explicit. One is that when we are really, really closer to the immediacy of our sensory experience, we are closer and closer to the present. And we often start by saying, let's sense into how we are making contact with our seat. It's not because we're invested in the upholstery business. It's because our sensation is present. Whatever that pressure feels like, and it's almost indescribable. If we even sense it right now, it's kind of almost indescribable. But we are aware of the present. that's much closer to I, thou than I, it. It's chugging along to the next thing I need to do. It's the doing consciousness. Being with our sensation is being consciousness. When we're in the present, there is a kind of avenue for presence, for being, for natural reality, the nature of reality to start revealing itself. There can always be a spaciousness present. There can always be a lightness and mystery present. But it does take a bit of slowing down and a bit of allowing, opening up for it to reveal itself. There is actually a kind of miracle involved in moving from I, it to I, thou. There is a kind of enchantment, a mystery, a grace, where there can be a felt shift between our kind of ordinary sense of, now I'm going to meditate on my breath, now I'm going to pay attention to my breathing, and where it starts occurring. Now, there's the Chicago psychologist, Csikszentmihalyi, who's got a very tough Czechoslovakian name, but he researched flow, where, we practice and we practice and we practice, and then there's a kind of emergence. There's a grace, there's an enchantment, there's a mystery, there's a flow. You can't make that transition. You can't dictate that transition. It is pretty much, you get the flour, you get the eggs, you get the milk, you get the sugar, you mix it all together, you put it in the oven, and you step away, and then emerges is a wonderful cake. You do what you do, we do the doing, and then being reveals itself. Another way to talk about this is I talked about it in the last Sunday talk I gave, and it's Theravada tradition. They talk about the factors of concentration. The first two are initial application of mind, sustained application of mind. There's a work that's doing, that we're putting our attention on the breath. We're sustaining it there. But then pleasurable interest arises. We don't create, we don't do pleasurable interest. Pleasurable interest is a being quality. Initial application and sustained application are doing qualities. Pleasurable interest is just the thrill of being with the breath. It's ridiculous. The breath is the most boring thing imaginable. I mean, it's always with us. We never pay it any mind. It's so uninteresting. We never pay it any mind. Except when we're meditating, we put our attention on it. And all of a sudden, we don't know when, we don't know how. Well, we do know how. We've put our attention on it. We've sustained our attention on it. And all of a sudden, the universe in a grain of sand. It's fascinating. The breath is fascinating. So I mentioned last time, Maslow, Abraham Maslow talked about peak experiences. Women are knitting and they're blissed out. For those of us who aren't knitters, how the hell does that make any sense? Well, they're placing their attention on the knitting, they're sustaining their attention, and all of a sudden, they're at peace. The world makes sense. They're out of time. They're non-dual. It can be anything. It can be chopping celery. It can be reciting a mantra. there is a time when doing or seeing becomes permeated by being. You know, if you were to sit somewhere and focus on a spot on the horizon, and you'd be really, really intent on that spot, that's kind of initial application, sustained application. It's doing, it's seeing. But all of a sudden, you might notice that there you are, you're sitting on top of a hill, and you're surrounded by space and openness and airiness. You're still focused, but then you're kind of aware of this whole permeation of your experience by space and lightness and openness. There's doing, and there's being. Being is always present. Deep spiritual nature is always present. It can present itself as a bit of a mystery, a bit of grace or enchantment. But it's way, way important to know that it is possible for this kind of movement from doing to being can occur. It can open us to aspects of experience that are real, but maybe unfamiliar. You know, it's very, very interesting, the driver of ordinary mind. Our ordinary mind hears this stuff. We go to talks on spirituality, we go to talk on mysticism, on peace. Our ordinary mind wants it. But our ordinary mind rushing along and doing and being dominant, it's hard for it to become aware of what's fresh and spiritual. It's very, very common as we teach our students will kind of let out, almost by accident, that they've had a kind of unusual experience. And then in 5 minutes, they'll turn around and their ordinary mind will say things like, nothing's ever changed, nothing will change, I can't make any progress, I don't even know what spirituality is about. But they have told us 5 minutes before, very explicitly, very, very clearly, they had an unusual experience. It really had some depth, it had some meaning, it had some spaciousness and timelessness. The ordinary mind, it's amazing to watch this, forgets and starts telling the old story. And as a teacher, and we're really, really sensitive to this, it's kind of, wow. You know, somebody's sticking a needle in your arm with reality. You're saying you've experienced it, and then you're sitting there with the needle in your arm and you're looking me straight in the face and say, I never experienced a needle. The not knowing potential of ordinary mind is phenomenal. Frankly, we are seeing this in a way all over the world nowadays with all sorts of ways in which people don't know reality and are insisting on not knowing reality. It's a very, very big, profound issue. But in spiritual practice, it's important for us to at least hear, even with our ordinary mind, that unusual experiences can occur. And when they do occur, it really, really is advisable to pay them some mind, to give them some attentiveness. Our attentional practice is oriented towards softening and weakening the press of the ordinary mind. The ordinary mind is a kind of dictator. It's kind of like an autocratic government. It's not letting any fresh information in. It's just wanting to control the news. And it's very, very powerful. And our attentional practice is a countervailing power. It can soften and weaken the ordinary mind and let fresh things occur. So as we sit and do even the very, very simple attentional practice we do, or the very simple chanting that we do, it's very, very useful to have just a little corner of your attention being aware. How am I as I do this practice? Am I feeling pressurized, contracted, tight? You just notice that, if that's what reality is. It's okay, it's part of the practice. Maybe tight, maybe contracted, pressurized. Or, as I'm doing this practice, is something else present? Am I feeling less pressurized, more spacious, light, buoyant, sense of meaning? Is there some kind of perhaps almost incomprehensible sense of meaning and peace that's permeating my being that I have no understanding of where it came from, and maybe not even fully understand how it arises, because it is in a way a bit of a miracle? But can I smell those roses as part of what's occurring? And both might be present. You might feel pressurized, tense, and aware that you're in some kind of larger, spacious, open, sky-like condition. Just as dark clouds occur in a blue sky. And part of it is, can we allow our ordinary mind to be relaxed enough to allow what may not make any sense whatsoever to occur? Namely, being can permeate doing and be present in doing. And it's a way that, we talk a lot about non-duality in our Dzogchen practice. But one of the big ways that that meaning really occurs is that deep spiritual presence of being can permeate every aspect of our doing. And that's enormously liberating and inspiring. So I will leave you all with that thought. And we are going to end the teaching portion of our presentation for the morning. And we will have our meditation from 11 to 12. And at 12, we will have our Dharma conversation, 12 to 12:45 Central Time. And Anne will be leading the meditation. So thank you all. Great to see you, and have a wonderful Sunday. Those of you who will be